Good afternoon. I am Ryan Griffin and I will be going over the Engineer's Mini Guide. Purpose of the guide. The Engineer's Mini Guide was created to highlight key information that is important for engineers and architects to know about the CDBG program requirements. It is a compilation of requirements taken from the administrative manual and consolidated into this single guide. Wrong way. CDBG Basics. Here are some of the basics of the CDBG program. The state CDBG program may only award grants to non-entitlement units of general local government. The funds are available to incorporated villages and cities with a population of 50,000 or less and counties with a population of 200,000 or less. Every CDBG project must meet one of the three national objectives benefiting low and moderate income persons, elimination of slum and blight, or urgent need. Overall, 70% of income, overall 70% of the funds must meet the LMI national objective. Most CDBG projects have a 3-year timeline for completion, and remember that CDBG is considered gap financing and may not be used to replace other sources of available funding. Next, I'll cover the roles and responsibilities of CDBG awardees and their support. Units of local government are referred to as subrecipients when awarded a grant. The UGLUG is responsible for determining the needs for the community through citizen participation and a public hearing with a needs assessment. The needs assessment should help the community identify the need for the project. The UGLUG will also need to verify the ownership and eligibility of the facility they want to apply for. The UGLUG will need to decide how the project will be administered and if they wish to use a third party for grant administration and use CDBG funds to pay for it. They need to follow the proper procurement process. The UGLUG will also need to ensure their application is complete and accurate and provide originally signed documents as part of the application. The roles and responsibilities of the grant administrator include ensuring the application is complete and contains all necessary documents. If any revisions or alterations are needed, they must be done in a timely manner. The grant administrator will assist the UGLUG with procurement for pre-selected professional services such as engineering and architectural services. The grant administrator also assists the preparation of the environmental review record. Engineers and architects prepare the preliminary engineering report or preliminary architectural report to be submitted with the application and ensure the costs are reasonable and are within the allowable maximum costs for all aspects of the application. They may assist with the environmental review record, and they should update the cost summary before going out to bid. The engineers or architects should also ensure the project is on schedule and achieving milestones, and that the project is completed according to the approved scope of work. Engineering or architectural services are typically procured using competitive proposals. When engineering or architectural services are procured prior to grant award, and UGLUG is seeking preliminary engineering, final design, and construction inspection within one RFQ, they need to follow the strictest requirement between CDBG and their local procurement policy. However, if the UGLUG does not intend to use CDBG funds to pay for these services, they should follow their local procurement policy and state law. The scope of work for each service must be clearly and separately detailed. CDBG does not fund preliminary development services. The contract must be made contingent on the award of CDBG funds. It is recommended that UGLUGs procure for preliminary, final design, and construction inspections within one RFQ to avoid a potential conflict of interest. When the UGLUG has procured preliminary design services separately and now needs to procure final design and construction inspection, they will need to include a disclosure in the RFQ naming the firm that provided preliminary design services for the application, and state that this firm has familiarity with and knowledge of the project. It is important that the firm must not be involved with preparing the RFQ for final design and construction inspection services. The rating criteria must be structured so that the firm having knowledge of the project will not benefit as a result of the knowledge in the scoring process. The UGLUG should include a form for the respondent to sign to either confirm and disclose the nature of the conflict or confirm there is no potential or perceived conflict. A DeBar check for the selected firm will need to be completed by DED before executing the contract. Required preliminary engineering architectural report content. The engineer mini guide contains all the content required for the preliminary engineering or architectural report. It is important that the costs listed in the PER or PAR match the cost summary table in the application exactly. The project costs must be the same throughout the application. The PER or PAR needs to include a description of the needs to be addressed by the proposed project and needs to include a minimum of 3 alternatives and recommended alternative and reason for selection. It should also include the total estimated project cost and the anticipated annual operation and maintenance cost of the proposed project and must be signed and sealed by a Missouri licensed engineer or architect. Engineering design and inspection fee maximums. CDBG utilizes the American Society of Civil Engineers Manual number 41 curves as a guide to the maximum cost allowable. The cost should be a lump sum or a cost plus a fixed fee with a maximum amount. The maximum allowed for engineering design is based on the total construction cost of the proposed project. Surveying, geotechnical, and hydrological services are included in the engineering design maximums. The construction inspection is capped at 75% of design costs. Environmental review. All CDBG projects require an environmental review. The requirements are found at 24 CFR Part 58. Once the application public hearing has been held, all project activity must cease until the environmental review has been completed. No bidding or work may occur until DED issues the authority to use grant funds. Engineers and architects can collaborate with the environmental review preparer by providing official project description, identify permitting requirements and timelines, determine whether the project site contains wetlands, prepare project maps, and develop conditions of approval, which are measures to mitigate potential impacts of the proposed project. Conditions of approval should be shared with all parties, and should be added to the contract documents. Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisition Act of 1970. Any acquisition, including easements, is subject to the Uniform Act when CDBG's funds are included in the project, regardless of whether the CDBG funds are used for acquisition. The proposed project is subject to URA requirements on the date of the application public hearing. If acquisition took place before the date of the application public hearing, it can be subject to URE if DED determines the acquisition was intended to support the proposed project. Once the projected use of CDBG funds is determined, no acquisition of property or easements can occur until environmental review is completed and DED has issued the authority to use grant funds. Excuse me. If property is needed for the project prior to the authority to use grant funds being issued by DED, an option agreement to purchase should be used. The option agreement does not impose any obligation upon the potential buyer to purchase the property. When a project needs real property or easements, the UGLUG grant administrator and engineer or architect must work together to ensure proper Uniform Act steps are followed. Citizen participation. To meet citizen participation requirements, at least one public hearing must be held prior to the UGLUG submitting an application. A second public hearing is required to address grant performance when the project is at least 80% complete. Notification of public hearings must be done at least 5 days in advance, and a hearing must be held at an accessible location. County applicants are required to advertise the public hearing notice in their local newspaper. Construction procurement. Competitive sealed bids must be used for all construction contracts. Construction procurement must be completed by publicly soliciting sealed bids and using a firm fixed price contract, including unit prices awarded to the lowest, most responsive and responsible bidder. The scope of work in bid and contract documents must be the same as what approved in the grant award. The engineer or architect must update the cost estimate before going out to bid. The bid specs should provide a complete and accurate description of the materials, products, and services to be provided. The CDBG contract content guide should be used for contract language for the federal and state requirements. A cost analysis of the construction contract and any change order should be completed to determine cost reasonableness. Contracts must include completion times and liquidated damages. The Build America, Buy America Act is applicable in CDBG projects and requires any infrastructure project to use domestically sourced materials. All iron, steel, manufactured products, and construction materials must be produced in the United States. HUD is phasing in BABA requirements, so refer to the Engineering Managed Guide for the procurement chapter for more information. Federal and state prevailing wage rates must be requested from DED 10 days before the bid advertisement date. Both the federal and state wage orders must be inserted into the bid packet. Updated federal and state prevailing wage rates must be requested from DED 10 days before the bid opening date. If they have changed, an addendum with the updated wage orders must be distributed at least 72 hours before bid opening. The request for bids must be published in a newspaper of general circulation once a week for 2 consecutive weeks prior to bid opening. Minority and women-owned firms, Section 3 DD firms, must be directly solicited. Bids must be opened and read aloud in a public meeting. The contract needs to be awarded within 90 days of the bid opening date, and a pre-construction conference should be held to discuss the project requirements. Construction management. All contractors and subcontractors must be cleared by CDBG prior to setting foot on the job site. A start of construction notice should be sent to CDBG within 10 days of the contract award. The prevailing wage project notification form must be sent to Missouri Department of Labor and CDBG. Construction should begin within 90 days of contract award. CDBG funds should be expended proportionally as much as possible to other sources of funds. Change orders. All change orders should be approved by the subrecipient prior to being submitted to CDBG. Change orders may result in new or additional impacts in the environmental review record, which will need to be updated before the work is completed. Any changes to the approved scope of work or any request for additional funds must be done through the grant amendment request and amendment to the environmental review record. These changes will need to be approved by DED prior to the work being done. Close out. At the end of the project, the engineer or architect will sign the certificate for acceptance and final payment. If the environmental conditions of approval were required, the engineer or architect must sign off on each condition listed on the COA form and provide supporting documentation of how the conditions were met. The prime contractor must send a signed and notarized affidavit of compliance for the subrecipient by the last payment. Lastly, the subrecipient will hold their closeout public hearing and discuss grant performance.